This particular video is a work in progress. An update will be released in due course. If you are watching this video, then note, it is best used as supplementary material, supporting your own reading of related texts from both the UK local councils and gov.uk websites. The Landlord Help Sheet, Mandatory Points, Good Ideas and Best Practices, Draft V1. A cut and paste job compiled by Tools Club. This document is a work in progress. There is still potentially a lot more information that needs to be added to it. However, in its current state, it still provides tips and guidance, valuable for both landlords and tenants in the form of mandatory points, as well as good ideas and best practices for landlords and tenants. Plus, it also shows how to avoid various pitfalls and hazards in private renting. This help sheet incorporates the following information from an array of documents listed below. Landlord Responsibilities. What does the Landlord Responsibilities document contain? It contains a copy of the following papers from gov.uk. Private Rented Scheme, PRS. Guidance, How to Rent, the checklist for renting in England. Buying or selling your home. Houses in multiple occupation, HMOs. How to rent a safe home. The How to Rent a Safe Home Guide contains a copy of the following paper from gov.uk. Guidance, How to Rent a Safe Home. The following documents, also containing multiple papers from gov.uk, are yet to be included in this, the Landlord's Help Sheet. 1. Guidance for landlords and tenants in private sector. And 2. The Homes, Fitness for Human Habitation, Act 2018. Although we can expect a significant level of overlap between this Landlord's Help Sheet and the above two documents, we might also expect more content from the above two documents that can usefully be added to this help sheet as well. So, what do these other two documents contain? The Guidance for Landlords and Tenants contains a copy of the following gov.uk papers. Guidance, Landlord and Tenant Rights and Responsibilities in the Private Rented Sector. Guidance, How to Let. The Homes, Fitness for Human Habitation, Act 2018 document contains a copy of the following papers. Guidance, Guide for Tenants. Guidance, Guide for Landlords. I hope to incorporate the relevant information from these papers into this, the Landlord's Help Sheet, as soon as possible. Okay, great. Let's move on. Next, a 2-column table. Mandatory points. And for more information. This first table column highlights what landlords must do. The second column shows us where we might find this information in the other documents. So, starting with consent. The landlord may not need the freeholder's consent, but if there is a mortgage, the lender's consent will always be needed. Before renting, the landlord should always make sure they have the necessary consent to rent the property. Check the documents of potential tenants. Landlords and agents should confirm the tenant's identity, immigration status, credit history and possibly employment status. Do they have the right to rent property in the UK? Landlords in England must check that all people aged 18 or over, living in their property, as their only or main home, have the right to rent. Landlords must carry out this check before the start date of the tenancy agreement. There are 2 types of right to rent checks, a manual document-based check or a check via the Home Office online checking service. Your landlord can't insist which option you choose, but not everyone can use the online service. Further information on how to prove your right to rent to a landlord can be found on gov.uk. The tenancy agreement. Make sure you have a written tenancy agreement, and as landlords, you must understand your rights and responsibilities as set out in the agreement. The landlord or agent usually provides the agreement, but a tenant can ask the landlord or agent to consider using a different version instead. The government has published a model tenancy agreement which can be downloaded for free. If the tenant has any concerns about the agreement, they can seek advice before they sign. If a tenant is unhappy with their tenancy agreement, the Tenant Fees Act allows tenants to walk away from unfair terms without forfeiting the holding deposit. Permitted fees. The government's guidance on the Tenant Fees Act contains information about the fees that letting agents and landlords are prohibited to charge tenants, as well as the fees that are permitted. Permitted fees are as follows. Rent. A refundable tenancy deposit capped at no more than 5 weeks' rent where the total annual rent is less than £50,000, or 6 weeks' rent where the total annual rent is £50,000 or above. A refundable holding deposit, to reserve a property, capped at no more than 1 week's rent. Payments associated with early termination of the tenancy, when requested by the tenant. Payments capped at £50, or reasonably incurred costs, if higher, for the variation, assignment or novation of a tenancy. Payments in respect of utilities, communication services, TV license and council tax. A default fee for late payment of rent and replacement of a lost key /security device giving access to the housing, where required under a tenancy agreement. From the 1st of June, 2019, landlords /letting agents cannot charge certain other fees. See the government's guidance for more information. Protect all tenant deposits in a tenancy deposit protection scheme. Tenancy deposit protection, TDP. Available schemes, England and Wales. Deposit protection service. My Deposits. Tenancy Deposit Scheme. These government-backed schemes ensure your tenants will get their deposit back if they meet the terms of your tenancy agreement. Do not damage the property. Pay the rent and bills. The tenant's deposit must be put in a scheme within 30 days of getting it. There are separate TDP schemes in Scotland and Northern Ireland. All TDP schemes offer you two options. The scheme hold the deposit for free, known as a custodial scheme. You or the agent holds the deposit and you pay the scheme to insure it, known as an insured scheme. Since the 1st of June, 2019, there has also been a cap on the deposit that the tenant is required to pay at the start of the tenancy. If the total annual rent is less than £50,000, the maximum deposit is 5 weeks' rent. If the annual rent is £50,000 or above, the maximum deposit is 6 weeks' rent. The deposit must be refundable at the end of the tenancy, usually subject to the rent being paid and the property being returned in good condition, and it must be protected during the tenancy. How long do you want the tenancy for? The landlord must allow you to stay in the property for a minimum of 6 months. Most landlords offer tenancies for a fixed term of 6 or 12 months. However, it is possible to negotiate a longer tenancy. Alternatively, you could agree to a tenancy which rolls over on a weekly or monthly basis. These tenancies have no fixed end date, but the landlord must allow you to stay in the property for at least 6 months. Give your tenants a tenant information pack. The following info needs to be included in this pack. Start date of tenancy. Address of property. Landlord name. Address. Telephone number. Email address. For properties in England or Wales, landlords are obliged to provide tenants with their name and an address in England or Wales, where the landlord will accept service of notices, in writing. The rent is not lawfully due until they do so. Tenancy Support Officer. Name. Telephone number. Housing Benefit Claim Reference. Gas meter reading. The tenant may lawfully take photos showing the meter reading and the date and time, if possible, as this helps protect them from paying for the previous tenant's bills. Utility company. Telephone number. Account number. Electric meter reading. Utility company. Telephone number. Account number. Water company. Telephone number. Account number. Energy. The Energy Performance Certificate, EPC. More on the EPC below. Deposit, TDP. The deposit protection scheme used. Inventory. The inventory, sometimes referred to as a check-in report, accurately records the condition of walls, fittings, including fitted appliances. A joint visit should be undertaken to compare the property against the inventory. As an extra safeguard, the tenant should take photos. The landlord may want to ask for a copy of these photos, to back up the inventory. Any damages should be accurately recorded on the inventory. Tenant keeps a copy of the inventory so that it can be checked against the condition of the property when you move out to avoid deductions for damages. The tenant should only sign the tenancy if they are happy everything has been properly recorded. In this way, the inventory acts as verification if a dispute about the deposit arises at the end of the tenancy. Any problems discovered after moving in must be notified to the landlord as soon as possible so that they can be put right and tenant is not blamed for the pre-existing damage. Are your fixtures and fittings in an acceptable state? If not, then these may need to be changed prior to tenants moving into your property. Gas/electric meter reading, reading at start of tenancy. Water reading, reading at start of tenancy. Different to the information pack, also provide your tenants the latest copy of the guide, How to Rent, the checklist for renting in England. Give your tenants out-of-hours contact numbers in case of emergency. Give tenants a general contact number to report any maintenance issues. Include in the tenant's information pack the following information as well. The location of working smoke alarms on each floor, including carbon monoxide alarms for properties with solid fuel appliances, for example, log burners or open fires. A copy of the gas safety certificate. How the gas or water supply be switched off in an emergency. A copy of the energy performance certificate. How to set the boiler for water and central heating. The days when refuse and recycling are collected. A report showing all electrical installations safe and in good working order. Note that for new tenancies from the 1st of July 2020 and existing tenancies from the 1st of April 2021, the landlord must provide tenants with an electrical installation safety report at the start of any tenancy and then at least every 5 years. What to do in case of a fire. A health and safety report highlighting information on potential hazards. A list of items for prospective tenants to check to make sure everything works as it should. For example, water, windows, lavatories, etc. Make an energy performance certificate available to all potential tenants, certificate rated E or above. Energy performance certificate, EPC. The EPC will give an indication of running costs of the property, bills for gas and electricity. Tell you the overall energy efficiency rating for the property. Help you identify drawbacks to the property, such as solid walls, uninsulated roof, single glazed windows, etc., which could lead to excess cold and / or increased heating costs. List improvements that have been recommended, such as double-glazed windows, loft insulation, etc. This is not an exhaustive list. Landlords must provide a valid EPC to someone who is interested in renting the property at the earliest opportunity. Provide a valid EPC to the person who ultimately becomes the tenant. Show the energy rating of the home when it is being advertised. Improve properties with Energy Performance Certificate (EPC) ratings of F or G by carrying out energy efficiency works before they can be rented out for new tenancies. See further information. Since April 2018, unless they have been granted an exemption, landlords have not been permitted to rent out homes that have an EPC rating of F or G. A Section 21 notice served by a landlord under an AST will not be valid unless and until the landlord has provided the tenant with a copy of the EPC. More about Energy Performance Certificates. Energy Performance Certificates, EPCs, are needed whenever a property is built, sold, rented. You must order an EPC for potential buyers and tenants before you market your property to sell or rent. In Scotland, you must display the EPC somewhere in the property, for example in the meter cupboard or next to the boiler. An EPC contains information about a property's energy use and typical energy costs. Recommendations about how to reduce energy use and save money. An EPC gives a property an energy efficiency rating from A, most efficient, to G, least efficient, and is valid for 10 years. Check how you could make your home more energy efficient using the Energy Savings Trust's Home Energy Check. How to get an EPC. You will need to find an accredited assessor. They'll assess your property and produce the certificate. Find an energy assessor in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Find an energy assessor in Scotland. You can be fined if you do not get an EPC when you need one. The person selling the house, the landlord or the letting agent must show you the EPC if you're buying or renting. Buildings that do not need an EPC. These include places of worship, temporary buildings that will be used for less than 2 years, standalone buildings with total useful floor space of less than 50 square meters, industrial sites, workshops and non-residential agricultural buildings that do not use a lot of energy, some buildings that are due to be demolished, holiday accommodation that's rented out for less than 4 months a year or is let under a license to occupy. Listed buildings. You should get advice from your local authority conservation officer if the work would alter the building's character. Residential buildings intended to be used less than 4 months a year. Find an EPC. You can look at an EPC for your own property or for other properties free of charge. This lets you compare your home's energy performance with that of similar homes. Find an EPC. Opt out of the EPC register. You can opt out of the register if you do not want other people to be able to see your EPC. Contact the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, MHCLG. mhclg.digital-services@communities.gov.uk. Telephone 020 3829 0748. Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Find out about call charges. For gas boilers etc., provide a gas safety certificate. Landlords must make sure gas appliances and flues are safely installed and maintained by a gas safe registered engineer. The landlord must provide a gas safety certificate at the start of the tenancy, before the tenant moves in, and within 28 days of each annual gas safety check, if there is a gas installation. You can find details of registered gas engineers which you can check against their identification and registration number online at Gas Safe Register. You should check the gas safety certificate and check for any problems highlighted. Electrical safety. Under the electrical safety standards in the private rented sector, England, Regulations 2020, landlords have to get their property electrics checked at least every 5 years by a properly qualified person. This applies to new tenancies from the 1st of July 2020 and existing tenancies from the 1st of April 2021. The electrical installations must be safe and your landlord must give you proof of this. For more information please see our guidance on electrical safety standards in the private rented sector. Faulty wiring and old, untested electrical installations can lead to fires, shocks, burns and even death. Wired fuses or cartridges present a much higher risk and are a significant fire hazard. Landlords. Make sure that electrical installations and electrical equipment supplied is safe at the outset of the tenancy. Regularly carry out basic safety checks to make sure that the electrical installations and appliances are safe and working. And to repeat, carry out safety checks on electrical installations at least every 5 years. Product safety in the home. The tenant and the landlord should check regularly to ensure all products provided in the home, as well as fixtures and fittings, are safe and that there haven't been any product recalls. Help is available at the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, Trading Standards and the Child Accident Prevention Trust. Ensure blinds are safe by design and they do not have looped cords. This is especially important in a child's bedroom. See more information. Cold. A cold home is one that cannot be maintained at a temperature between 18 degrees Celsius to 21 degrees Celsius at a reasonable cost to the occupier. Living in cold conditions can cause serious health problems. Landlords must supply adequate heating in proper working order. Ensure the property is insulated, meeting at a minimum EPC rating. Repair broken windows and doors. Heat. Excess heat in a property can cause dehydration, strokes, heart attacks, breathing difficulties and infections. This is more likely to affect older people. Trip and fall hazards. Trips and falls can lead to significant injury, broken bones or loss of confidence. These are more likely to take place in baths and showers, on stairs or around low balconies and windows. Older people and children under 5 may be more vulnerable to trips and falls. Landlords. Keep stairs and floor surfaces in good repair and free from trip hazards. Make sure that large low-level windows have restrictors or safety rails. If there is an escape window in case of a fire, ensure that it can be opened for this purpose quickly and easily. Ensure there is good lighting on stairs and that stairs have appropriate handrails. Lighting and noise. Inadequate lighting and excessive noise can cause health problems, as well as things like trips and falls. Landlords. Provide adequate lighting, although tenants are usually responsible for replacing light bulbs after the start of the tenancy. Damp and mold. Damp and mold can cause or worsen respiratory problems, infections, allergies or asthma. They can also affect the immune system, particularly in young children and those with certain medical conditions. Damp also contributes to excess heat loss and puts up heating bills, as well as causing damage to building fabric and contents, including clothes and furniture. Landlords must tackle dampness, including, if necessary, making repairs to the property's structure and exterior. This includes repairs that are likely to be the cause of damp and mold, such as leaking gutters. Make sure that the property is properly ventilated. Security. Properties should be safe and secure. Landlords. Make sure that windows, doors or other points of entry can be properly secured. Make sure access to the property is well lit. Overcrowding. It is illegal for landlords to let a property to more people than it is suitable for. Overcrowding can cause accidents and the spread of contagious disease and can prevent quick and safe exit in the event of a fire. For houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, there are now nationally mandated conditions as to the minimum room size which may be occupied as sleeping accommodation. HMOs are properties which are occupied by 3 or more people from 2 or more families and who share facilities like kitchens or bathrooms. A room smaller than the specified size must not be used as sleeping accommodation, and communal space in other parts of the HMO cannot be used to compensate for rooms smaller than the prescribed minimum. Local authorities may impose stricter space and amenity standards for HMOs in their area, and it is important to check with your local authority what their HMO standards are, including acceptable room sizes. Landlords. Make sure that rooms for sleeping and the kitchen, bathroom, living or other recreational spaces are sufficient for the number of occupants. Hygiene. Poor hygiene can cause illness, so you should be able to keep your property clean, prepare meals safely and rely on well-functioning drainage. Landlords should provide adequate cooking, bathroom and waste disposal facilities. In large HMOs, landlords must provide enough bins and adequate means of disposing of rubbish. Water supply. Inadequate or unsafe water supply or lack of space for personal washing and for clothes washing or drying, and lack of facilities for the removal of wastewater, blocked forward/broken drain pipes, can lead to illness. Landlords. Keep the water supply in repair and proper working order. Make sure the property has an adequate water supply and drinking water is supplied from the mains, instead of a water storage tank. Pests and vermin. Infestations from insects, rats and mice can cause illness including vomiting and diarrhea. Pests and vermin can also cause asthma, other allergic reactions and stress. Pests can contaminate food and preparation surfaces. Landlords. Ensure the property is free of pests and vermin, in cases where these have not been caused by the lifestyle of the tenant. Maintaining the structure and exterior of the property helps to prevent entry by pests or vermin. Provide secure waste disposal facilities. Chemicals and hazardous substances. Asbestos. If asbestos is present, landlords should seek professional advice on its removal. Asbestos was commonly used in building materials in the 1950s and 1960s as a material to resist the spread of fire. It was also used in architects predominantly before 1985. However, it was not banned from use in new buildings until around 2000. Materials containing asbestos are generally safe if they are in good condition, but if broken or damaged can release harmful fibers and dust into the air. You can find out more from the Health and Safety Executive, HSWE. In certain parts of the country there is a risk to health from exposure to radon gas, and you can find more details from Public Health England. Lead from paint or water/waste pipes has the potential to cause nervous disorders, mental health or behavioral problems. Paint with a high level of lead content tends to be found in older houses, and dissolved lead is only likely in acidic, i.e. usually private, water supplies. Gas appliances which are faulty can release carbon monoxide, which can cause suffocation. Commonly seen carbon monoxide warning signs include stains on fireplaces and popping sounds coming from a kitchen grill which can burn when closed. See more information about carbon monoxide. Leaking gas can cause explosions. You should know what to do and how you can switch off the gas supply in case of a gas leak. Solid fuel appliances can also cause carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide alarms are required by law for privately rented properties with such appliances. Find more information about the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm, England, Regulations 2015. Structural defects. Properties that have been badly maintained can lead to a risk of physical injury. The landlord should make sure the roof looks in a good state of repair. Look for any loose tiles or leaking gutters. The windows open and close properly. There are no cracks or holes in walls, loose panels or badly fitted partitions or structural elements. You can access the property entrance and all rooms safely. You should not have to put yourself at risk of physical injury by climbing or walking on structurally unsafe ground, stairs or landings. Landlords should give at least 24 hours notice requesting access at a reasonable time of the day. Ensure that the buildings and contents insurance provider is aware that you are renting the property. Property fences. If a fence gets broken or blows down, the landlord should know which side fence belongs to their property and which belongs to the neighbor. If the damaged fence belongs to a neighbor, the landlord should talk to the occupants to settle responsibility and get the fence mended. Find out where the water stopcock is for the property. This information needs to be made available to the tenant. Since the 1st of June, 2019, most fees charged in connection with a tenancy are banned. For example, viewing fees and tenancy setup fees are not allowed. Landlords must confirm the identity of the tenant, immigration status, credit history and possibly employment status. Landlords in England must check that all people aged 18 or over, living in their property as their only or main home, have the right to rent. Landlords must carry out this check before the start date of your tenancy agreement. There are two types of right to rent checks, a manual document-based check or a check via the Home Office online checking service. Decide on smoking, pets and other miscellanea. What are the rules about them, as well as for other things such as keeping a bike, dealing with refuse and recycling. Decide on bills. Who is responsible for bills such as electricity, gas, water and council tax? The tenant or the landlord? Usually the tenant pays for these. Fire risks, smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. Landlords must have at least one smoke alarm installed on every story of a property they let out. In addition, if there are solid fuel appliances like wood-burning stoves or open fires, carbon monoxide detectors must be provided as well. Landlords must make sure that alarms are working on the first day of the tenancy. After that, tenants should take responsibility for their own safety and test alarms regularly to make sure they are working and replace the batteries where needed. Landlords must pay for the cost of a broken or faulty alarm. Fire can cause serious harm or death from burns and the inhalation of smoke or gas. So as well as providing working smoke alarms on every floor, landlords should situate cooking, heating and other electrical appliances away from flammable materials and fire exits. Regularly test appliances and maintain them in a good condition, making sure that any furniture supplied has the required labels and fire resistance. In large houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, make sure the house has the correct means of escape and other fire precautions and that it is correctly maintained. Houses in multiple occupation usually require additional fire safety measures such as heat alarms, fire extinguishers and fire blankets. For more information, see this guidance. Licensing requirements. Houses in multiple occupation, HMOs. HMOs are outside the scope of this document, but may be more fully included later. For now, briefly, small HMOs are usually properties where 3 or more unrelated people share facilities such as a kitchen or bathroom. Larger HMOs may include at least 2 families split across 5 people or more. Some HMOs must be licensed. Tenants may lawfully want to check that the landlord has the correct license. Landlords of licensed HMOs must by law give tenants a statement of the terms on which they live in the property. Selective licensing. Different to HMOs, some single-family dwellings may also need to be licensed. Check with your local authority whether the house is within a selective licensing scheme area. Selective licensing enables a local housing authority to require all landlords of privately rented housing in a designated area to obtain a license for each individual property. It gives the local housing authority powers to inspect properties and enforce standards to address specific property issues. More on HMO license fees. To be added later. Buying or selling your home. Complete another time. Contents. 1 overview. 2 energy performance certificates. 3 estate agents. 4 offers. 5 transferring ownership, conveyancing. 6 tax. Okay, great. Now let's move on to the second half of this document. Good ideas and best practices. Fab. We are now looking at a raft of good ideas and best practices for both landlords and tenants. To start, investigate and join the private rented scheme. Next, the landlord should join an accreditation scheme. Accreditation schemes provide training and support to landlords in fulfilling their legal and ethical responsibilities. Your local authority can advise you about accreditation schemes operating in your area. The National Landlords Association, the Residential Landlords Association and the Guild of Residential Landlords run national schemes. Investigate disabled facility grants. Investigate HMO licenses should you ever rent a single property to 3 or more unrelated individuals or to 2 or more families. If using a mortgage, then get permission from your mortgage provider to rent out the property. Check any new tenant has a right to stay in the UK and the right to rent. Investigate paying housing benefit directly to the landlord via the safeguard form. Acceptable reasons are previous history of rent arrears or debt problems, a drinking problem, a drug dependency, a gambling addiction, mental health issues, or any physical problems. As an aside, the landlord can ask for rent to be paid directly to their account once the tenant is 6 weeks in arrears. Provide a manual of tenancy support. Okay. Let's suggest some content for such a manual. Check your landlord details. For properties in England and Wales, tenants should make sure they have the name of the landlord and an address in England or Wales, where the landlord will accept service of notices, in writing. Landlords are obliged to provide you with this information and the rent is not lawfully due until they do so. If the property is a flat, ask whether the landlord is the owner or leaseholder of the flat. If leaseholder, then ask whether the freeholder, for example, perhaps the owner of the block, has agreed to the flat being let out. If the landlord has a mortgage, ask whether the mortgage company has agreed to the letting. The landlord may not need the freeholder's consent, but, if there is a mortgage, the lender's consent will always be needed. Be aware that you may have to leave the property if the landlord does not keep up the mortgage payments. If the property is a house, ask whether the landlord is the owner, whether the landlord has a mortgage and whether the mortgage company has agreed to the letting. You may have to leave the property if the landlord does not keep up the mortgage payments. If the landlord is not the property owner and they claim to be a tenant, a family member or a friend, be very cautious, as it could be an unlawful subletting. For houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, tenants can lawfully check that the landlord has the correct type of license. Landlord accreditation schemes. Tenants should look for landlords who belong to an accreditation scheme. Accreditation schemes provide training and support to landlords in fulfilling their legal and ethical responsibilities. Your local authority can advise you about accreditation schemes operating in your area. The National Landlords Association, the Residential Landlords Association and the Guild of Residential Landlords run national schemes. Watch out for scams. Be clear who you are handing money over to. Tenancy agreement. The tenant should make sure they have a written tenancy agreement. They should read it carefully to understand their rights and responsibilities before signing it. The landlord or agent usually provides one, but you can ask the landlord or agent to consider using a different version instead. The government has published a model tenancy agreement which can be downloaded for free. If the tenant has any concerns about the agreement, they should seek advice before they sign. If they are unhappy with the tenancy agreement, the Tenant Fees Act allows tenants to walk away from unfair terms without forfeiting the holding deposit. Inventory. Agree an inventory, or check-in report, with your landlord before you move in and, as an extra safeguard, make sure that you take photos. This will make things easier if there is a dispute about the deposit at the end of the tenancy. If you are happy with the inventory, sign it and keep a copy. Other mandatory documents. The landlord must provide tenants with a copy of this guide how to rent, the checklist for renting in England as a printed copy or, if you agree, via email as a PDF attachment. A gas safety certificate. The landlord must provide you with a copy of this certificate before you enter into occupation of the property and must give you a copy of the new certificate after each annual gas safety check, if there is a gas installation or appliance. Deposit paperwork. If you have provided a deposit, the landlord must protect it in a government-approved scheme within 30 days and provide you prescribed information about it. Make sure you get the official information from your landlord, and that you understand how to get your money back at the end of the tenancy. Keep this information safe as you will need it later. The Energy Performance Certificate. Your landlord must provide you with a copy of the EPC, which contains the energy performance rating of the property you are renting. EPC band ratings range from A to G. A copy of the EPC must be supplied, free of charge, at the onset of your tenancy. As of April 2020, all privately rented properties must have an energy performance rating of EPC band E or above, unless a valid exemption applies, prior to being let out. You can also search online for the EPC and check its other items that might go into such a manual. Ideally, the landlord should also provide you with a record of any electrical inspections. Under the electrical safety standards in the private rented sector, England, Regulations 2020, landlords have to get their property electrics checked at least every 5 years by a properly qualified person. This applies to new tenancies from the 1st of July 2020 and existing tenancies from the 1st of April 2021. The electrics must be safe and your landlord must give you proof of this. For more information, please see our guidance on electrical safety standards in the private rented sector. Evidence that smoke alarms and any carbon monoxide alarms are in working order at the start of the tenancy. Tenants should then regularly check they are working. Meter readings. Remember to take meter readings when you move in. Take a photo showing the meter reading and the date and time, if possible. This will help make sure you don't pay for the previous tenant's bills. Code of practice. Ask whether your landlord or agent has signed a code of practice, which may give you additional assurance about their conduct and practices. Is the tenant entitled to housing benefit or universal credit? If so, they may get help with all or part of the rent. Private renters may receive up to the local housing allowance, LHA, rate to cover or help with the cost of rent. There is an online calculator which can help to see if a tenant can afford to live in a particular area. Also available is advice about managing rent payments on universal credit and also advice on paying bills. Rent guarantees. Some landlords might require you have someone to guarantee your rent. If you don't have a guarantor, then Shelter also provide help with regards to rent guarantees. Claiming housing benefit. If the tenant needs to make a claim for housing benefit, it is their responsibility to register your claim as soon as possible. If you have been assessed as vulnerable in any way, the Housing Options Officer may help you with this and complete the necessary forms with you. If housing benefit does not cover the rent. If the tenant's housing benefit does not cover the whole of the rent, they will need to make arrangements with the landlord to collect the top-up. Do not wait until your claim is assessed before paying your first top-up. Pay at least the amount your housing officer indicated would be payable. If the housing benefit award is more or less than originally expected, the top-up can be adjusted. If you are awarded less than expected and the tenant feels unable to pay the top-up, then they must immediately contact your landlord to discuss the situation. Tenancy support, Housing Association charitable services such as Lifeways and Chatham Contact Point. West Kent Housing Association offers a service called Lifeways. If you need any extra assistance in making a benefit application or any other aspects of your tenancy, a referral for floating support can be made to get you the extra help you require. If you are not offered this service to start with and feel that you are unable to cope alone, please contact Chatham Contact Point, see contacts at the end of this booklet, and ask for a referral to be made. As well as helping you with form filling and household bills, they can liaise with your landlord for you, over repair issues, help you access training, find charities that can help with emergency funding, etc. Financial problems and rent arrears. If you are having financial problems, or are falling into rent arrears, speak to your landlord as they may be helpful, and are likely to be more sympathetic if you talk to them about any difficulties early on. Should you need further help, contact your local housing authority, Citizens Advice or Shelter as soon as possible. If you are eligible for legal aid, you can also contact civil legal advice for free and confidential advice. Check out these practical steps for managing your rent payments. If your housing benefit is paid directly to the tenant. In this case, it is sensible for the tenant to open a separate bank account to pay the rent from, if they are likely to be overdrawn, especially if the benefit is likely to be swallowed up by your overdraft before the rent is paid. Most people will be able to open a basic bank account. Housing benefit will be paid 2 weekly, in arrears, usually directly into the tenant's account. If you are paid by check, you can sign the back and pay it directly to your landlord. You do not need to wait for it to clear. Late rent. It is the responsibility of the tenant to make sure that the rent is paid in full and on time. If any housing benefit is paid directly to the tenant and they do not pay the rent to the landlord can ask for the rent to be paid directly to them once the tenant is 6 weeks in arrears. If there is a genuine reason why the tenant is unable to pay the rent, they must contact the landlord as soon as possible to find out if there is help available. If the tenant's rent is more than 14 days late, they could be liable for a default fee. A default fee for late payment of rent is limited by the Tenant Fees Act to interest on the outstanding amount, capped at 3% above Bank of England base rates. The landlord/agent cannot charge any other fees. For more information, please read the government's guidance for tenants on the Tenant Fees Act 2019. Further, the tenant could lose their home because they have breached the tenancy agreement. If tenants have problems, gov.uk has links to further advice. For example, check out these practical steps for paying your rent on time. Pay household bills. The tenant should pay any bills that they are responsible for on time, such as council tax, gas, electricity and water bills. If tenants pay the gas or electricity bills, they can choose their own energy supplier. Check heating. Provide means for prospective tenants to do the following. Check if there is central heating, radiators or air vents connected to a central heat source, such as a boiler, and that it is working properly. If there is no central heating, check out what is the alternative type of adequate heating throughout the property, such as storage heaters, etc. Check the EPC. A low EPC rating indicates that your property does not retain heat very well and may be very cold during the winter. Tenants can ask their landlord to make energy performance improvements based on the EPC recommendations, as well as report back to the landlord about valid repairs and faults. Hygiene. With regard to home and garden waste, prospective tenants should ask about how often refuse is collected, especially in any shared communal areas. Check there is space for and access to outdoor bins. Ask who is responsible for the upkeep of the garden. Make sure there is sufficient usable space in the kitchen for safe storing, preparing and cooking food. Regarding damp and mold, tenants should look out for damp patches on walls and ceilings, mold, peeling wallpaper and condensation on windows. Damp and mold may be caused by problems with the building such as leaking pipes, wastes or overflows. Rain can seep through the roof where the tile is missing, spilling from a blocked gutter, around window frames or a cracked pipe. Rising damp may be due to a defective damp course or because there is no damp course. Rising damp only appears on ground floor rooms, and only up to a maximum of 1 m up the wall. These causes of damp often leave a tide mark. If tenants have any problems with damp, report them to the landlord straight away. Try to do this by either a letter or email and keep a copy. If your landlord does not respond, contact the local private sector housing team. Contact details for Medway are on the last page of this booklet. They will liaise with the landlord to get any repairs carried out. Help avoid condensation. Every home gets condensation at some time. There is always some moisture in the air, even if you cannot see it. If the air gets colder, it cannot hold all the moisture and tiny drops of water appear. This is condensation. It occurs mainly during cold weather, whether it is raining or dry, and is more likely near windows, in corners, in or behind wardrobes and cupboards. These steps will help you reduce the condensation in your home. Produce less moisture. Dry washing outdoors or in the bathroom with the door closed and the windows open. Tumble dryers must be vented to outside. Cover pans and do not leave a kettle boiling. Ventilate to remove moisture. Keep a small window ajar when at home. Ventilate kitchens and bathrooms when cooking and bathing. Close the kitchen and bathroom doors when in use. This prevents moisture reaching other, colder, rooms. Use any mechanical extract fans installed in bathrooms and kitchens. Where possible, place furniture against internal walls to aid circulation. Insulate, draft-proof and heat your home. You can get help with the cost of insulation and new heating if you are on certain benefits. Your loft must contain a minimum depth of insulation. Insulation and draft-proofing will keep your home warmer and cut fuel bills. Do not block permanent ventilators or chimneys. Do not draft-proof windows in the kitchen or bathroom. Do not draft-proof windows where there is condensation. Check the property is adequately insulated, heated and ventilated. For example, ensure you can open and close windows securely. With regard to the water supply, tenants should check the plumbing works by flushing toilets and turning taps or showers on. Run the hot water and make sure there is adequate hand washing facilities. See if there is a cold feed for drinking water, rather than from a cold water tank. Water leaks and blocked toilets. When you move into the property, you should ask your landlord where the stopcock is. If a pipe is leaking near an electrical fitting, turn off the electricity at the mains or unplug the affected item. If the toilet gets blocked by being mistreated, putting items down the pan which should not go there, or cracked due to you dropping something down it, your landlord may charge you for the repair. Your landlord should, however, treat such a problem as urgent to avoid any further damage to the property and for health and sanitation reasons. You must report this to your landlord as soon as possible. Tenants can check electrical fittings. Check that the lights turn on and off and check that plug sockets are not coming loose from the wall. Check there are no frayed or exposed cables or wires. Check there are residual current devices, RCDs, protecting all circuits. An RCD is a safety device that switches off electricity automatically if there is a fault. Try to minimize the use of extension sockets and leads, as this can be a fire risk. If you feel you do not have enough electrical sockets, contact your landlord or local authority. Electrical problems. Any electrical problems must be reported to your landlord as soon as possible. Do not attempt to repair electrical faults yourself, as they need to be seen to by a qualified electrician, which your landlord will organize for you. Electricians are often in high demand and you may be required to wait indoors for some time before they can attend to the problem. With regard to product safety, the tenant and the landlord should check regularly to ensure all that products, fixtures and fittings provided are safe and that there haven't been any product recalls. Help is available at the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, Trading Standards and the Child Accident Prevention Trust. Ensure blinds are safe by design and they do not have looped cords. This is especially important in a child's bedroom. See more information. Check that any furniture or soft furnishings provided are correctly labeled for fire resistance. See more information on product safety. With regard to fire risks, allow tenants to check for working smoke alarms on each floor. Find the easiest way to escape in the event of a fire, and check that locks on fire exit doors can be opened without a key. Regarding trip and fall hazards, tenants should look for any obvious trip hazards and forward/ or uneven surfaces, particularly on stairs, bathroom floors and at the exits of showers. Prospective tenants should not feel the property is overcrowded. Walk through the property and see if there is enough room for each person who will live there. Make sure there are adequate kitchen and bathroom facilities for the number of occupants. Look for a suitable area where you can cook and prepare food. With regard to security, if the property is burgled and it's not the landlord's fault, the landlord will not be responsible for the loss of the tenant's belongings, so tenants should have their own home contents insurance policy. Tenants and prospective tenants should also check there are suitable locks on the doors and windows. With regards to lighting, tenants should make sure there are appropriate fittings for light bulbs, and that bulbs can be easily changed. With regard to pests and vermin, tenants should check for pests like bedbugs or carpet mites if the property is furnished. Look for cracks, holes or voids that would allow the entry or shelter of pests. Look for signs of vermin such as mice droppings or nests. Asbestos. The landlord should seek professional advice on its removal. The tenant should not attempt to remove it themselves. Structural defects. Properties that have been badly maintained can lead to a risk of physical injury. Make sure the roof looks in a good state of repair. Look for any loose tiles or leaking gutters. The windows open and close properly. There are no cracks or holes in walls, loose panels or badly fitted partitions or structural elements. You can access the property entrance and all rooms safely. You should not have to put yourself at risk of physical injury by climbing or walking on structurally unsafe ground, stairs or Common repair issues. Minor repairs such as changing light bulbs and fuses are the tenant's responsibility. Any other disrepair or problems should be reported to the landlord as soon as possible. Do this either by letter or email and keep a copy. Unresponsive landlords. With regard to reporting faults and complaints procedures, if the landlord is unresponsive, tenants may, where the delay continues, and the landlord does not appear to be taking steps to deal with the problem, consider seeking advice. Citizens Advice, Shelter, a housing advice center, a solicitor or the local authority may be able to help. Regarding delayed general repairs, your local private sector housing team will be able to help. For example, for Medway, call on 01634 333066. However, you must report the problem to your landlord before calling the Medway private sector housing team and give your landlord a chance to complete the repairs. The tenant should never withhold rent, as doing so could make them vulnerable to eviction. What to do if the landlord fails to carry out repairs? Tenants can inform the local authority, especially if the tenant thinks that the risk is a danger to health and safety. The tenant should check their tenancy agreement to find out if the property becomes unfit for human habitation, for example, due to a fire or flood, then whether this excuses them from paying rent, up until the damage has been fixed. If the home is not fit for human habitation, the tenant can take the landlord to court under the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act 2018. The court can make the landlord carry out repairs or put right health and safety problems. The court can also make the landlord pay compensation to the tenant, if appropriate. If the tenant has suffered loss and experienced inconvenience because the landlord is in breach of their repairing obligations, the tenant can also consider taking action in the county court. The county court can order the landlord to do the necessary works and to pay compensation. If the state of the home is a statutory nuisance because the health of the tenant is affected, the tenant can consider taking action in the Magistrates' Court under Section 82 Environmental Health Act 1990. The magistrates can order the landlord to do the necessary works and to pay you compensation. Before considering taking court action, the tenant should seek independent advice on their rights and responsibilities. Statutory notices. If you have a serious complaint about the property and your local authority has sent a notice to the landlord telling them to make repairs, your landlord may not be able to evict you with a Section 21 notice, no fault eviction, for 6 months after the council's notice. You can still be evicted with a Section 8 notice if you break the terms of your tenancy. Failure to comply with a statutory notice is an offence. Depending on the notice, local authorities may prosecute or fine the landlord up to £30,000. Local authorities have powers to apply for banning orders which prevent landlords or property agents from managing and or letting out property if they are convicted of certain offences. If a landlord or property agent receives a banning order, they will be added to the database of rogue landlords and property agents. There is a specific process for this, which can be found here. Illegal evictions. If you are being forced out illegally, contact your local authority. Shelter and civil legal advice, see help and advice below, may also be able to help you. If your landlord wants you to leave the property, they must notify you in writing, with the right amount of notice. You can only be legally removed from the property if your landlord has a court order for possession and a warrant is executed by court bailiffs or sheriffs. Protection from eviction. Landlords must follow strict procedures if they want you to leave your home. They may be guilty of harassing or illegally evicting you if they do not follow the correct procedures. Landlords must provide you with the correct notice period, and they can only legally remove you from your home by obtaining a court order for possession and arranging for a warrant to be executed by court bailiffs or sheriffs. See Understanding the Possession Action Process, a guide for private residential tenants in England and Wales. Rent repayment orders. Rent repayment orders require a landlord to repay a specified amount of rent to a tenant and or a local authority, where there has been, for example, an illegal eviction or failure to license a property that requires licensing. Rent repayment orders also cover breach of a banning order or failure to comply with certain statutory notices. Where a rent repayment order is made, local authorities may retain the money if the tenant's rent was paid by state benefits. Where a tenant has paid rent themselves, the money is returned to them. If benefits covered part of the rent, the amount is paid back pro rata to the local authority and the tenant. If you are reading a print version of this guide and need more information on the links, please contact us or on 0303 444 0000 or at 2 Marsham Street, London SW1P 4DF. Separating from partner. If you live with your partner and you separate, you may have the right to carry on living in your home. Finding another place to live. If you are concerned about finding another place to live, then contact the housing department of your local authority straight away. Depending on your circumstances, they may have a legal duty to help you find accommodation, and they can also provide advice. The local authority should not wait until you are evicted before taking action to help you. Letting agent redress schemes. If you have a complaint about a letting agent's service and they don't resolve your complaint, you can complain to an independent redress scheme. Letting agents must be a member of a government-approved redress scheme. Permitted fees. The government's guidance on the Tenant Fees Act contains information about the fees that letting agents and landlords are prohibited to charge tenants, as well as the fees that are permitted. Permitted fees are as follows. Rent. A refundable tenancy deposit capped at no more than 5 weeks' rent where the total annual rent is less than £50,000, or 6 weeks' rent where the total annual rent is £50,000 or above. A refundable holding deposit, to reserve a property, capped at no more than 1 week's rent. Payments associated with early termination of the tenancy, when requested by the tenant. Payments capped at £50, or reasonably incurred costs, if higher, for the variation, assignment or novation of a tenancy. Payments in respect of utilities, communication services, TV license and council tax. A default fee for late payment of rent and replacement of a lost key /security device giving access to the housing, where required under a tenancy agreement. All other fees, including the following, are banned. Viewing fees, any charge for viewing the property. Tenancy setup fees, any charge for setting up the tenancy or contracts. Checkout fees, any charge for leaving the property. Third-party fees, any charge for anything that is done by someone other than the landlord or tenant but that the landlord must pay for. Penalties for prohibited fees. If a landlord or letting agent charges you a prohibited payment, a banned fee according to the Tenant Fees Act 2019, or unlawfully retains a holding deposit, they could be liable for a fine of up to £5,000, and if there are multiple breaches they could be liable for a fine up to £30,000 as an alternative to prosecution. Local authorities are responsible for issuing these fines. Landlords or letting agents cannot rely on giving notice under Section 21 to obtain a possession order if they have not repaid any unlawful fees or deposits they have charged under the terms of the Act. Living at the property. It is your responsibility to keep the property clean and tidy and pay all the bills on time. If you do not look after the property well, your landlord may use this as a reason to evict you. Please find below some tips on looking after your property. You should keep all carpets and floor coverings vacuumed, swept or washed regularly. You should keep the windows, glass and frames clean. Make sure the toilet is cleaned regularly with a lime scale and bleach product. Do not rely on a rim block but clean the pan thoroughly at least weekly. Any white goods, such as cookers and fridges, must be kept clean inside and out with a purpose-made cleaner. You should obtain permission from your landlord to decorate. Your tenancy agreement should state if the landlord's permission is required. Your landlord may make deductions from your deposit if you have redecorated without permission or it is not of an adequate standard. If you put up shelves or pictures, any damage to the walls should be made good upon leaving the property. Do not make holes in double-glazed window frames. When washing machines are plumbed in, the pipework must be capped off at the end of the tenancy. Care should be taken when installing electrical appliances so as not to tear the floor covering. A competent person should carry out any electrical connections to existing electrical points. If new electrical wiring is required, consult with your landlord. Replace batteries in smoke detectors as required. Only a qualified electrician or gas engineer should install your cooker or light fittings, etc. You can obtain a list of contractors from the Medway Fair Trader Scheme. Email fairtraders@medway.gov.uk or tell 01634 333555. You must make sure that the garden is kept tidy, cut the grass and clear any rubbish regularly. You must put your rubbish out for collection on a weekly basis. Keep it in a dustbin until collection. Your landlord could make deductions from your deposit for clearing rubbish or cleaning the property at the end of the tenancy. Contents insurance. It's worth getting contents insurance to cover your possessions too, because the landlord's insurance won't cover your things. Report any need for repairs to your landlord. If you think there are any repairs that are needed, you should report these to your landlord. Failure to report the need for repairs could be a breach of your tenancy agreement. In extreme circumstances, there may be a risk to your deposit if a minor repair turns into a major problem because you did not report it. Reasonable access. Your landlord should be allowed access at reasonable intervals for the purpose of carrying out a property inspection or to carry out repairs. At least 24 hours notice should be given unless for an emergency repair. You should not withhold your permission without a good reason. Consider if having a smart meter installed would save you money, if you are responsible for paying the energy bills. Read guidance about your rights and information about how to get a smart meter. We'd recommend that you tell your landlord before you get one. Harassment by landlord. If your landlord is making unannounced visits or harassing you, contact your local authority, or if more urgent, dial 999. And don't forget to register to vote. Provide landlord health and safety expectations of the tenant with regard to reporting and complaints procedures. Once tenants have moved in, if they have an issue or complaint regarding repairs and health and safety issues, they should inform the landlord. They should also put your concerns in writing, including by text or email, and keep a copy. For serious risks to health and safety, such as faulty electrical wiring, tenants should do this straight away, as soon as they are aware of the problem. Inform tenants that they may be in breach of the tenancy agreement if they do not. In these communications, the tenants should let the landlord know if they consider the issue to be urgent and the reason why. Your landlord should be allowed access at reasonable intervals for the purpose of carrying out a property inspection or to carry out repairs. At least 24 hours notice should be given unless for an emergency repair. You should not withhold your permission without a good reason. Other examples of reporting issues relate to common repair issues, condensation, damp and mold, etc. Gas or coal leak example. If you smell gas or suspect a carbon monoxide leak, call the National Gas Emergency Helpline on 0800 111 999. Do turn off the gas at the meter unless the meter is in a cellar/basement. Do put out naked flames. Do open doors and windows. Do keep people away from the area affected. Don't smoke or strike matches. Don't turn electrical switches on or off. Provide an estimate of time that is usually needed to repair different types of issues. What is a reasonable period will depend on specific circumstances. With something serious or dangerous, like a boiler failure or electricity outage, it might be reasonable to expect the landlord to arrange for a technician to attend within 24 hours to carry out an initial inspection. Landlords should give at least 24 hours notice requesting access at a reasonable time of the day. Tenants should cooperate with the landlord for the purpose of providing access to the home so that the necessary inspections and works can be carried out. The tenant may need to take time off work to be at home to allow access. Tenants should give the landlord a reminder if they think there is an unreasonable delay. Also provide alternative contacts should the landlord contact become faulty. Landlord should keep safe a list of emergency reliable electricians, plumbers, carpenters, handymen and gas safe engineers. Repairs. The landlord is always responsible for repairs needed to the structure and exterior of your home. This includes the drains, gutters and external pipes. It also includes essential means of access such as a front garden path. The installations in your home for the supply of water, gas and electricity. The installations for sanitation, which are things like basins, sinks, baths and other sanitary fittings. The installations for heating the property and providing hot water. The landlord may also be responsible for repairing any communal areas of the building, like stairwells or halls, especially for some types of shared accommodation, bedsits and houses in multiple occupation, HMOs. Tenants paying for repairs. A tenant may have to pay the cost to repair damage that they have caused, for example water leaking into another flat from an overflowing bath. Tenants are also responsible for paying to put right any damage caused by their family and friends or any other visitors they allow into the property. Tenants should not carry out repairs unless the tenancy agreement says they can. Tenants should not be forced to do repairs that are the landlord's responsibility. Landlords should give at least 24 hours notice requesting access at a reasonable time of the day. Tenants must give reasonable access to the landlord or the agent, and to relevant workers, to enable the repairs to be carried out. Share steps for ending the tenancy. To be added another time. Consider if you want a rent guarantee. Some landlords require a rent guarantee. Consider if you want to let a letting agent to take care of your property. Letting agents must be a member of a redress scheme. Reputable agents are often accredited through a professional body such as ALA Property Mark, GPP, Safe Argent, RICS or UCALA. Smoking and pets, keeping a bike, dealing with refuse and recycling and any other tenant-specific issues. Are there any tenant-specific issues relating to smoking, pets, keeping a bike, dealing with refuse and recycling or anything else that may be specific to tenants? Decide on who pays the bills. Check who is responsible for bills such as electricity, gas, water and council tax. Tenant or landlord. Usually, the tenant pays for these. See advice on paying bills. Be aware of tenant protections should they make a complaint to a landlord and to the local authority. Protections for tenants from being evicted when a complaint has been made. Retaliatory eviction is when a landlord asks a tenant to leave their property because they have made a complaint, for example about conditions. This is unacceptable. For short tenancies, once a legitimate tenant complaint about the condition of the property has been raised with the landlord and the local authority, and the local authority serves a notice, the tenant may have protections under the Deregulation Act 2015. Once the tenant has made a complaint, the local authority should carry out an inspection of the property and, if appropriate, they will serve a notice on the landlord. If this is either an improvement notice or a notice of emergency remedial action under the Housing Act 2004, the landlord cannot legally evict the tenant for 6 months using the Section 21 process provided the tenant has followed the correct procedure. And this is followed by a list of additional information.